Having had two failures on the spin, I thought I'd pick up something with a higher degree of probable success, which is going to be a 35-pound Yew Primitive. Now it looks like there's a ton of wood there to make something much heavier, but like a lot of these things, there's always problems. Like we've got chainsaw damage there. The other thing is the centre line. It was obviously a very asymmetric log. The centre line's there, so I do I position a bow here or there? What do? I can lose this end where there's this very weird feature where there was a crossing branch rubbing against it and a knot, so I don't need too much length. So I thought if it's only going to be £35, it will be very skinny. Tricky thing will be reducing the sapwood thin enough to get it down to £35, and you can't really see what the sapwood's doing here because we've cut through this. This is all sapwood. I need to come back a bit into the heartwood to see what's going on, to see that heart sap boundary. Just for comparison, here's two of my nicest bows. This tiny little hazel bow that was made with virtually no measurement at all at a have a go day. It's only £30, very narrow in the grip and pretty damn fast for £30. And there's my old favourite twister, 45 at 27. And you can see they're very similar length, and that length would take us into this area where there was a crossing branch. So I think rather than saw it there, I'll saw it up here and see what's going on under there. Maybe that will get incorporated into the bow. Better to cut it too long and then shorten it if you have to, rather than cutting it short and wishing you had it longer. Interesting point is, why don't the grips of these two bows line up when they're the same length? It's because I did this one without measuring, and the lower limb is substantially longer than the upper, but it shoots beautifully. It's just tillered to balance. You also notice the bark's still on it, which is glorious, sort of coppery colour. The disadvantage is if you put the bow down in the wood, you might never find it again. I've just taken a very thin slice off the end of the log, and that illustrates nicely the sort of problem you get when you're trying to work a natural yew bow. So you can see the sapwood there is relatively thin and moderately consistent, but here it's much thicker. Here it's a bit sort of ambiguous, and you get this problem of trying to follow a ring. Well, if you followed this ring, you'd cut into heartwood there, because the heart sap boundary doesn't follow rings. It waggles all over the place. The other thing is, following a ring is a bit of a myth. It's essential in something like Osage, but in yew it doesn't really matter. But you do want continuous sapwood on the back of the bow. For comparison, here's a log I deliberately kept a cross section of some fast grown yew, which defies all the expectations of fast grown yew being pale and not having well defined sapwood. I mean, that's a lovely bit of wood, but even this you can see how the heart sap boundary doesn't follow a ring. I can't remember, I made a bow out of it, I can't remember where I actually laid out the bow. I'd have thought laying it out across there would have worked rather well. But yeah, just goes to show. Right, for now I've just laid it out dead straight, parallel. So in trimming it down, I'll get a better look at what the sapwood's like round the edges, because at the moment, I mean, that looks like it's all sapwood, but it's because it's just kissing the edge of the tree as it was in the round. Like sawing it through like that, it's a lot straighter, but you can see we're sort of falling off the edge of the log here. But this is the top of the trunk. This is a smaller diameter bit. We've also exposed some nastiness here, which is sort of associated with this knot and this crossing limb. But of course, as it's narrowed, that would probably be alright. I can rough off this big slat of heartwood, which may actually be useful for something later on. I mean, we don't know. And same this side. But by sod's law, of course, the stave's narrowest at the bit where you want it thickest, which would be the grip, so we'll leave that. And at a casual glance it looks like you're silly, you're not leaving any heartwood. But of course, if you look at it like this, if I cut across there, there's tons of heartwood. Taking off that big slat, and you can see we've got nice clean heartwood. Doesn't go right across, but there's plenty of width there for a primitive bow. Obviously I'm going to have to, the limb will come across this way towards the heartwood and also towards that centre, so that's not too bad. I've got a couple of bows with the centre pith visible through the handle. Makes quite a nice feature. Excellent, making a bit of progress, and it's pretty knot free there. It's quite nice and clean. Right, I've done the other end as well, and as you see what looks like, oh my god, I've cut it very thin, and it's all sapwood. You can see there's plenty of heartwood there, and the overall thickness is still like ½ an inch, which is going to be plenty for a 35-pound bow. You can also see it is flexing now, and you can hear bark cracking off it. But I mean, I'm leaning on that really hard. Now I've got it cut to a vague thickness, just roughed out, I can mark a centre line and mark out and saw out the shape, or the front profile as some people like to call it. I won't narrow the grip at all, because that may want to shift. I'm not even certain if the bloke's left or right handed or what have you, but we can mark a line down that. And the advantage of narrowing it and cutting out the shape is I'll then get a view in from the side of what the sapwood heartwood boundary is like. Right, I think that's quite a nice centre line, because you can see it's conforming to the curve of the growth rings, and it's not too far off from the central pith. And there's more sapwood here this side, so I'm getting it nearer the centre of the tree. So yeah, that's what I'll take as my centre line. Well, I might come this way a bit here because of that knot. That sort of marked it out, still leaving tons of width, but that will just rough off some of the scruffiness. Right, we've now got something that looks a bit more like a bow. I've followed some of the shape of the grain slightly, but I've not been too worried about it, because with a bow that tapers from wide to thin, you're bound to cut across some lines of grain. Left all the width at the handle so I can line up the tips and the grip, and now you can see where this weird feature was and other things. Like this has gone, probably just chafed right through the heartwood to a great extent, so I may shorten the bow to there, or maybe leave the tip right there for maximum length. Another reason for not marking out the grip, you don't want to mark out the grip and then take 6 inches off one end. But I can see where I've got too much heartwood and that can be trimmed back. I can have a look at the thickness of sapwood. See there, that looks perfect. But sort of back here there's loads of sap and very little heart. But yeah, I can nibble away at it on the bandsaw, trim away. If I trim away the excess heartwood at the edges, yeah, that's a nice illustration. What would be if the camera would focus? You can sort of see the heartwood's thicker one side than the other, so it requires a bit of care. Nibble away the edges. Oh! Nibble away the edges, then work away the sapwood on the back, trying to follow the heart sap boundary